Counter-Strike Condition Zero is the franchise's black sheep. It's the least popular Counter-Strike game, somehow even beaten out by the Nexon free-to-play adaptation, and it's really not hard to understand why. Condition Zero was the product of nearly 3 years of development hell, during which it went through 4 developers, 2 complete project reboots, and an unclear number of delays. When it finally materialized in March of 2004, it did so without much fanfare. The game was essentially an underwhelming standalone update to the original Counter-Strike. Most changes were graphical, enabled by improvements to the aging Gold Source engine, while next to no meaningful advancement was made in the multiplayer sandbox. Condition Zero is instead best known for its single-player scenario mode, a sort of pseudo-campaign wherein the player could assemble a team of computer-controlled counter-terrorists using a pool of gradually accruing skill points, taking them into short matches against terrorist bots, and completing some rather uninspired objectives to win the game. Get 3 kills with this gun, rescue all the hostages, so on and so forth. Even at the time, this hardly inspired enthusiasm. The bots were frankly a bit stupid, and despite the engine improvements, the game just looked plain old. By 2004, CS 1.6 already had 5 years of official updates and community modifications keeping players tethered to it, while the rapidly impending Counter-Strike Source would provide a technically superior product just a few months later, bringing higher fidelity and allowing far more complex mods and plugins to be developed. There was simply no market for Condition Zero, and these things have only become more true in the intervening 20 years. Nobody ever even thinks about it. Except for me, because when I got a used gaming laptop in 2009, I took it with me everywhere. Being old, cheap, easy to run, and made by Valve, Condition Zero found its way into my gaming rotation around the same time as Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. But unlike Modern Warfare and its straight-shot linear campaign, Condition Zero's single-player scenarios gave me something approximating online shooter multiplayer even when I was without internet. So, I have a soft spot for Condition Zero, but there was a portion of the game that I never touched back then. Practically an entire second game included with purchase that most have since forgotten, if they even knew it existed in the first place. I'm speaking of Counter-Strike Condition Zero Deleted Scenes. Developed by Ritual Entertainment, the third studio to be placed at the project's helm, Deleted Scenes was supposed to be the game's primary single-player offering, but it was shelved after it failed to impress both critics and Valve themselves, resulting in Ritual being taken off the project before its completion. The game was instead handed over to Turtle Rock Studios, who'd, to this point, largely been responsible for the game's bot support. Turtle Rock cobbled together the finished product in less than a year, combining their own work with bits and pieces of Ritual's. But in an unprecedented move, Valve chose to release 12 of Ritual's levels as a bonus of sorts, installed as a separate game alongside Turtle Rock's offering, with 6 more of the cancelled levels releasing as free updates down the line. Thanks to the near-complete death of Condition Zero's multiplayer scene, and moreover, the passage of time, this collection of largely subpar levels has ironically become the most interesting thing about the game. 7 designers contributed to the 12 missions making up the meat of the experience, and each took a very different approach to converting Counter-Strike into a linear, single-player experience. I won't pretend that I've discovered some hidden gem or unsung masterpiece. As you'll see in the coming minutes, Deleted Scenes is an uneven experience that is often underwhelming and occasionally outright broken. But in its best moments, this take on Counter-Strike also shows remarkable promise, and its cancellation tells a largely untold tale about Valve and how poorly they play with others. So I thought I'd go through the main campaign, explain a bit about the folks who designed each level, and see if I can't find the best parts of the worst Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike Condition Zero opens in a helicopter, and like every other helicopter sequence in the 2000s, we are immediately shot down.
RPG from 3 o'clock, evade!
After an incredibly unearned title card, a man urges me to get away from the crash site over the radio, and sure enough, some very angry locals are converging. 2 minutes in, and it's already abundantly clear this isn't the type of single-player experience you'd expect from a Counter-Strike spin-off. Were I going into this totally blind, I would have expected something a bit more freeform and planning-oriented, in the vein of Rainbow Six or Ghost Recon. But as seriously as Condition Zero seems to take itself tonally, the closest gameplay comparison I can draw is Soldier of Fortune. It's a relatively fast-paced corridor shooter with abundant ammo and health pickups, swarms of enemies with forgiving aim and damage output, and scripted set pieces triggered by your progression through the level. My primary objective at this point was to rendezvous with a friendly sniper. Alright, well, let's get this straight. I just spent like 6 minutes clearing rooms full of dudes wearing white t-shirts and black plate carriers, and behind this door, a dude in a white shirt with a black plate carrier is crouched behind cover, aiming a rifle at me, and I'm supposed to realize before ventilating his skull that he's actually my teammate.
Boom! Chat, I will not die once. Once. Okay? I'm telling you this game is too easy for me, bro.
Fuck. Вперед, дверь открывается. Как я мог не догадаться? А, это был Браво Форс? Это был Браво Форс!
I'm a fucking global elite and go. Of course I'm good at its predecessor as well. Why did it just respawn? Hello? Delta Sniper has been... Oh.
They even put a checkpoint right here before you open the door, because they knew a significant portion of their players were gonna gun this guy down by pure reflex. Not a great start. Not how you're supposed to solve that problem. From here on, the level is more of the same. Shoot guys and trial and error your way into the one functioning door, or find the conveniently stacked crates that funnel you out of the area you've just cleared and into the next target-rich environment. There are some scripted set pieces and larger encounters, but nothing that isn't solved by clicking on it. While clearing the LZ, I gunned down another friendly by mistake, but was mercifully not punished for it, and before the chopper could rescue us, the sniper dude from earlier went quiet, so I had to backtrack, rescue him, and escort his wounded ass back to the LZ.
No way. I'm not going any further. Yes, I'll do what you say. No way. I'm not going any further. Okay.
From this level alone, I'm already beginning to understand why Valve abandoned this idea. It throws most of what made vanilla Counter-Strike good out the window. Granted, this campaign was cancelled and is thus unfinished, so some leeway has to be given for things that would have been fixed in later stages of development. But it does bear mentioning that both level design and enemy AI pale in comparison to Valve's own Half-Life, which is a problem considering that game was nearly 6 years old by the time Condition Zero released. Ritual's work would have seemed dated even if it were up to par with Valve's breakout hit. At least in a vacuum, rebooting development with a different team and a smaller scope was the correct decision, even if the final product was still disappointing. Still, this is only the beginning, and while Recoil isn't the weakest of the 12 main levels, it's likely the least interesting in terms of design. Most of the levels to come are much more ambitious, for better or for worse. The second mission is called Lost Cause, and at first glance, it actually offers some interesting variety. As a member of the German GSG-9, I'm tasked with sneaking through a Filipino jungle to scope out where some terrorists are keeping their hostages. I'm on strict no-kill orders here. Even shanking this guy in his sleep is an instant mission failure. I didn't really deem this worth mentioning earlier, but you may have noticed that I used a remote control explosive in the first mission to make myself a door. Counter-Strike Condition Zero offers a wide variety of extra equipment not featured in the mainline games, and Lost Cause allows me to use nearly the full arsenal. The first thing I'll do is steal a blowtorch and cut a lock, allowing me access to a moat I must now sneak through, careful not to alert any of the enemies above me. Just kidding, there's a solid invisible wall above me, and the hostiles can neither hear nor see me. The stealth here is completely manufactured. Even if I shoot my gun or stab the wall, all that happens is a fade to black. The AI don't even react. The same thing happens if you knife this tree at the beginning for some reason. Anyway, once you're under the house, you use a fiber optic camera to peek through some holes, because it was the early 2000s and that's just what you did. Once you have eyes on, you can use another piece of equipment, the radio, to order your team to move in.
Package position verified. Beginning assault.
All hell promptly breaks loose, and the 1 minute of half-hearted stealth gives way to another entire level of labyrinthine corridor shooting. From this point forward, Lost Cause takes place mostly indoors, and repeats a lot of the bad design habits seen in Mission 1. There's only ever one path through the level. The many corridors almost always have side passages and windows, but they're blocked off. Some of them will inevitably be opened by scripted explosions, but only after you've gone down the one available path. Changing map geometry in the middle of combat is a cool way to throw a curveball, but it's never really used in interesting ways here. It's only used to keep the player on a linear track until they have exhausted it, and then to funnel them into the next hallway full of bad guys, or in cases where a bit of backtracking is required, to straight up reuse combat arenas by spawning more dudes in the rooms you've already cleared. Enemies will also dive through windows or around corners to get the jump on you with these silly animations that remind me of this old arcade game called Target Force. While enemies are harmless during these animations, they unfortunately can't be harmed either. So you kinda have to just stand there and just wait for them to stand up and start shooting you. Actually, I noticed over the course of this level that basically any custom animation makes enemies completely invulnerable. This is particularly bad with the RPG guys, since, you know. Also, this sniper is just straight up floating in midair above a tree. You can't shoot him from underneath. You have to walk out into the open and aggro him first. This mission goes on for seemingly forever. A jeep crashes through a wall, there's a turret you can use, but frankly, it's just boring, and I'm bored of writing about it. These first two levels were designed by the same guy, Luke Whiteside, and they're the only ones he contributed to the 12 making up deleted scenes as main campaign. In addition to Recoil and Lost Cause, Whiteside also designed Fastline, one of the 6 bonus levels added to Condition Zero after release. This one is where that Soldier of Fortune comparison really comes full circle. However, it's also pretty straightforward and boring. There isn't anything to it. Somehow more so than either of the previous levels, you quite literally just walk down corridors. And the ending where you rescue a pair of schoolgirls made me roll my eyes.
Good work. Cleanup crews are on the way.
Now, I may not have been a fan of Luke's levels, but given his development history, they do at least make a little bit of sense. He got to start making custom levels for Duke 3D and Quake, 2 games lending themselves to the constant run-and-gun corridor action that Counter-Strike doesn't. With $200 to his name, Whiteside moved to Dallas in 1999, where he put together a pair of Half-Life levels in about 2 weeks, in hopes they would land him a job. He shot off a Hail Mary email to John Romero, and found himself employed and working on Daikatana within the week. Whiteside was let go from Ritual in June of 2003, likely in the wake of Valve's decision to take Ritual off the project. He would later work for Midway on Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, and then moved to Monolith Productions where he designed levels for Fear 2 and its expansions. He later found himself at Terminal Reality, working on... Oh, come on, man, you're not making it easy on me here. This is, unfortunately, where the LinkedIn trail ends for Luke, and while I could try and dig to find out what he's doing, we have more pressing matters to attend to. Recoil was set in North Africa, and put us in the boots of a US Navy SEAL. Lost Cause took place in the Philippines, and we played as a German counter-terrorist. Neither level had much in the way of exposition, and we were fighting different terrorist factions. So you may be wondering, what's the connection here? What's the story? The answer is simple. Condition Zero doesn't have one. Even though these levels must be played sequentially, they have zero connection to one another. On one hand, this makes some amount of sense. Counter-Strike has always featured a wide variety of locales and real-world counter-terrorist organizations from around the globe. But from a game design perspective, it spawns a myriad of issues. With 7 designers making levels more or less independently, you're gonna have consistency problems. That's just how that works. Even titans like Doom and Quake have spawned debate over specific designers and their tendencies, but those games had underlying formulas, themes, and locations that meant that levels could, at least on a first playthrough, pass as part of the same overall work. But in Condition Zero, this isn't the case. Developers were working with wholly different locations and themes, seemingly without any sort of guiding principles or thematic through-line. And consequently, the campaign is inconsistent in just about every conceivable way. Problems that plague one designer's levels will be solved in another's, but at the same time, cool ideas presented one minute will be completely abandoned the next. For most people, all this means is that the game is a mess, and I wouldn't blame anyone who overlooked Condition Zero with this in mind. But it also gives deleted scenes this ironic wildcard appeal. It's like the Bean Boozled of Counter-Strike. Sure, you're gonna end up eating the ones that taste like spoiled milk or moldy cheese, but every now and then, you might just find chocolate pudding. Which brings us to Mission 3, Secret War. And you know what? It's actually pretty good.
Everybody listen up. All right, comrades. Time to go over the standard procedure.
It's a little hard to focus on my CO's briefing with this guy repeatedly fondling his Steyr scout. And I mean, fair enough, I would be too. But the gist is that the president signed a disarmament treaty, and we were about to go shut down an old SS-18 launch facility. This would be a routine mission, except the facility went dark 24 hours ago.
Use your RC bombs to open this door.
This level's off to a much slower, more patient start. The soldiers are talking to each other and making plans, and I'm given some agency to explore. Wandering around, I found a hidden pair of dual elites, and they only cost me 11 HP. Eventually, I did my job and found the generator, at which point things escalated.
We are under attack by a large group of armed individuals. 2 men are already down, and we are retreating deeper into the silo.
Alrighty, we are leaps and bounds ahead of the first 2 missions in terms of both level design and atmosphere. Maybe I'm just taken aback that this mission had something to it besides... But the vibes here aren't half bad, nor are the combat encounters that ensue. The story goes that multiple terrorist groups are fighting over the fissile material in this base, so I'm interrupting fights that would be going down with or without my intervention. Despite the chaos, the enemy placement never feels cheap or excessive, and while the level is occasionally let down by the game's spotty hit detection, it's for the most part surprisingly coherent. We were too late to stop one of the terrorist cells from starting to launch and destroying the console, so we're ordered to get the remote detonators from a dead squad mate's body so we can cut the fuel lines.
Hurry up! Plant those bombs on the fuel line! Get out of here! The radio signal won't penetrate through the blast doors! I'm going to detonate the bombs from here and make sure nobody disarms these bombs! Get out of here! Everybody into the truck, now!
Near the explosion, comrade. Time to get...
Alright, this looks shoddy, because it is, but you know what? Mounted guns and cars are both shoddy in Valve's games too. I'll give this a pass for at least feeling cool and dramatic, and for capping off an actual good level. The pacing felt just right, and the atmosphere was about as well built as a standalone 10-minute mission could have managed. I wouldn't have been upset if Condition Zero was just about these guys. Secret War was designed by Russell Meekum, aka The Castle. And before we move on to his second level, I'd like to tell you a bit about him. This was Meekum's first job in the industry, but he'd previously been active in various Quake and Doom modding scenes, and would later design levels officially released in the Xbox 360 version of Doom 2. He's credited as a designer on Medal of Honor Airborne and Enemy Territory Quake Wars. He worked on the original Black Ops via support studio Nerve Software, and most recently, he did world design for Subnautica. I love finding stuff like this. I'm glad the dude's had a good career working on shooters, and I also think it's incredibly cool that he's still making Doom levels after all this time. Now, I do feel compelled to mention that after writing and almost finishing editing this video, I learned that Meekum is apparently up to metaverse and crypto bullshit these days, which is really disappointing. But, oh well, I won't let that sour my enjoyment of work he did 20 years ago. Building Recon starts in the Latvian police headquarters, where the British Special Air Service are being briefed about a missing nuclear warhead.
RAF intel has identified a warehouse where the weapon could possibly be located.
And thus, I'm sent to sneak around with no weapons. This is the first mission in the game where the enemies speak English, and since it's a stealth level, that means plenty opportunity for silly dialogue.
Hey, you got the light? Nope. You sure?
Yup.
I saw you light the cigarette outside.
Wasn't me.
The ensuing stealth seems to have actually been thought out and implemented. It's not a binary, you're hidden or you're detected like a lot of shooters at the time. If a guard sees you, he'll start to investigate, and you'll have a little bit of time to react before he opens fire or runs for the alarm. It's not revolutionary, and again, it's a bit too easy, but if the detection time was shortened just a bit, it would be plenty serviceable. At one point, the sound of your blowtorch breaking a lock wakes up a guard, and you have to hide until he returns to his post.
What was that?
Is anyone there?
This is, of course, scripted, but it's a neat trick, and shows more effort than I expected after the game's first foray into stealth.
Do you think we will get any warning before the plan goes into effect? I want to let my family know so they can get out of here.
Of course they will warn us. I think.
What? What do you mean, you think?
Well, they should warn us. It would be unethical not to.
Unethical? This organization revolves around being unethical.
You do have a point.
Look, I know these fake Russian accents are terrible, but it meshes with this goofy-ass writing perfectly.
Absolutely. My hands are freezing. I hope nobody tries to get in this place. I don't think I could pull the trigger with these fingers.
No problem. We could always throw icicles at an intruder.
There's a guard asleep in a room with some loose bottles, and if you knock them over, he wakes up and shoots you. There's another guard further down the line in the same situation, forcing you to do some parkour to get by. In the next room, we finally find some guns, and box seats to the Terrorist Manifesto recital. I was so enamored by this dude's mastery of public speaking that I didn't even notice the icon indicating I needed to take a picture of the missile. So some baddies kicked down the door and killed me.
Right. We have confirmation of a nuclear weapon inside the warehouse. All teams move into position.
The shooting starts, and once again we hear all the off-screen action just as well as our own. Some minor Half-Life 1 platforming later, and we're in the thick of it. God damn it, stop dressing my friendlies in the same colors as the bad guys. From here on out, building recon becomes a fairly standard 2000s shooter level, but given that this engine is from 1998, that's a compliment. There are tons of bad guys to shoot and guns to pick up. There's a tank you have to shoot with a rocket launcher, but once again, the action is much better paced than the first two levels of the game, and there's attention paid to small details that makes it feel far more alive. Like this little fountain you can climb into. You can only get in here during this area's initial firefight, since the box you have to climb on gets destroyed at its conclusion. It has armor and ammo for you to pick up, but the water is frozen and you'll slide around. Or a bit later down the line, there's a sniper up in a window that'll fall and get impaled on this spike when you shoot him. These are small things, but they go a long way towards making the level feel dynamic. The final encounter takes place in a grandiose church where the terrorist leader is making his final stand.
You lose, infidel. The device is armed, and you cannot stop it. Die! This will bring about a new age.
I don't know, man. I'm kind of loving this. Drug Lab is another Navy SEAL level wherein you raid a Colombian drug cartel compound. This level features helicopters, and none of them get shot down, so A+ for restraint. Once you're on the ground, you'll advance through the jungle, dodging mines and snipers as you go. There's a night vision sequence in a cave, leading to a pair of small buildings where the rest of the mission plays out. You clear rooms, and you plant bombs. There's also a dev cameo on a magazine in one of the holding cells. But that's basically all the interesting things about Drug Lab. Visually, it's quite similar to Lost Cause, but it's smaller and simpler. There are fewer nooks and crannies to explore, and no backtracking. I wasn't a fan of how Lost Cause did either of those things, but Drug Lab unfortunately feels even more claustrophobic and restrictive as a result of their complete absence. It's really close quarters, dudes come from too many places, and enemies are respawned in the level's few tiny arenas in lieu of any actual encounter design. Even though Drug Lab is only about 15 minutes long, it drags. I'm sorry to say it, but it's tied for my least favorite level of the main 12. Drug Lab was designed by Thyril McKinney Jr., who was an amateur Quake 3 mapper before working at Ritual. He ran the Quake site Mean Arena, if that brings anyone back in time a bit, before finding his own game studio down the line called Mangled Eye, and then another called Grey Mantis, the latter of which just put out a new game a few weeks ago, a PS5 exclusive shooter called Metal Savior Black. Most interestingly though, McKinney seemed to enjoy his work on Ritual's Condition Zero campaign enough that he kept putting out custom maps for it after release. He was also responsible for one of the other levels in the main campaign, but we have a couple others to play first. The next mission is called Motorcade Assault, and it was designed by Chris Voss, another Ritual employee who, are you sitting down, got his start as a bedroom Quake mapper. Professionally, he worked on Duke Nukem Manhattan Project before moving to Ritual Entertainment and contributing to Condition Zero. Motorcade Assault sees a group of GSG-9 operators ambushing a terrorist convoy in the streets of Venice. Like Drug Lab, it's a pretty straightforward combat level. It actually doesn't use any of the game's gadgets. However, you do get to use the AUG, and as established, I am a slut for Austrian polymer. Motorcade Assault is fine, I guess. It feels a bit undercooked. Enemies spawn behind you from time to time, and there are way too many snipers to track down. Also, if you fall in water, you don't die, but you have to reload a save, because there doesn't seem a way to climb out of it. The level's HVT spends the climax taunting you from behind a bulletproof window, 5 feet from an endless supply of grenades, and inches from a grenade-sized hole in the glass. Come on now, you can do better. Motorcade Assault was Voss's only contribution to deleted scenes, though he did also design the multiplayer map Corruption, which was officially released for Condition Zero multiplayer a few months after launch. By this point, Voss had long since been let go, in the same wave of layoffs as Luke Whiteside. Happily though, he's gone on to have a long and prosperous career. First with Monolith Productions, working on Fear and its expansions, and later with Whiteside on Fear 2. Most recently, he served as a senior level designer for Respawn Entertainment's Jedi Survivor. Good for you, Chris. So far, my two favorite things about Condition Zero deleted scenes are the levels designed by the castle, and the Russian voice acting. Mission 7 is called Thin Ice. It's a Spetsnaz level designed by the castle. In other words, let's fucking go. Thin Ice places us completely alone on a Russian cargo ship, which currently has the throttle pinned on a collision course with... something. The shore. Don't know what the plan is there, but hey, it's probably not good. Paper-thin premise aside, this is probably the best 10 minutes of gunplay in the game. Starting with just a 5.7, I clear room after room of Russians, collecting a UMP, pump shotgun, and a deagle as I go. God, the pacing of the combat here is perfect. Seriously, no notes. If Ritual's vision for a single-player Counter-Strike was a fast-paced room-clearing head-clicker, this level should have been the blueprint. Vigilant corner checking is rewarded, and the enemies are dense enough to make you feel like a badass, but not so dense they become overwhelming or annoying, as is the case in several of Condition Zero's other levels. After redirecting the ship away from shore, dessert is served in the form of a boss fight. I'm given an AWP and plenty of health packs, and all I gotta do is click on a Harrier jet until it blows up. Indulgent? Yes, but that's how dessert should be. Thin Ice is easily the best level in the game. The presentation isn't as strong as Secret War, but what it lacks in atmosphere, it makes up by just being really damn fun.
Excellent work, comrade. You are a credit to the motherland.
Downed Pilot is another McKinney joint, and as the name suggests, it's a rescue mission. At first, it's a pretty straightforward room-clearing affair, visually resembling CS Militia, but as I got deeper into the level, I realized something was wrong. There are practically no ammo caches on this map. Pretty soon, I found myself with an empty rifle, empty pistol, out of offensive grenades, and struggling to stay alive. I really only made it through by cheesing the AI with a smoke grenade. Maybe this is meant to be an ammo-saving gauntlet, but I don't know. The hitboxes are way too finicky for the devs to be pulling shit like this, and there's a bug that makes you involuntarily mag dump when loading saves, so this got tedious really quickly. Otherwise, I didn't mind the flow of combat to this point. Maybe I was just softening on the game after the last level, but running and gunning with the FAMAS was pretty fun. Eventually, McKinney relented and gave me more guns and ammo, at which point things picked back up. This room with the tank has an M4 in it, and there's a secret P90 hidden under this grate if you're craving more delicious polymer bullpup action. I do feel this level starts to get a bit obnoxious with the amount of random nooks and crannies you have to climb into or breach with the RC bombs, but don't worry, it's about to make up for it. After rescuing the first pilot and exploring a bit more, the building starts to collapse, and we head back up to the surface. Having found the remote bomb downstairs, we can finally open the story pass. I blew myself up so hard the game crashed. Please clap. Despite the building coming down around me, I continue my search for the other two missing pilots. There's a PC we need to activate to move forward, and next to it, another PC is currently running Condition Zero. There's another monitor in this room with a dev cameo on it, and while I was scoping that out, sleep gas came through the vents and knocked me unconscious. And suddenly, I was playing a very different level.
Hey, was ist da los?
Hört mit dem Klopfen auf! Ihr wollt wohl, dass ich reinkomme! Das reicht! ¡Mátalos a todos!
Wer schießt da?
So that's fucking cool. Oh, and there's all this ammo. And they gave me a Desert Eagle again. I fight my way back outside and meet up with my team. The remainder of the level is basically just more room clearing, and we find the pilots and escort them to safety. Yada yada, mission complete. Including deaths, this level clocked into over 30 minutes, making it the longest in the game. I'm a little disappointed the prison break section wasn't more of a thing. If starving me of ammunition and making me fight with a knife earlier in the level was intentional, I don't really see why they didn't just shorten the initial gunfights and leave me unarmed for longer, but it's a neat set piece anyways. I don't hate this one, definitely better than Drug Lab, but I feel a bit more time in the oven would have done it some good. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Todd Rose, aka Mr. Clean, and he had to do it to him. And no, I'm not being mean, Mr. Clean is actually his gamertag. 3 of the official Condition 0 levels are his doing, but only one of them is part of the main 12, Hankagai, which literally translates to downtown. This mission in Tokyo sees the Yakuza attempt to assassinate a politician. Now, Todd, I think you might have misunderstood what the Yakuza do, cause it's not this. Like, notably, the Yakuza are nowhere near this overt. Anyways, there's a novelty to seeing really old games portray neon-soaked city streets. Something about the primitive lighting in games of this vintage feels really cozy. There are storefronts and silly signs everywhere. It's all very cliche, as you'd expect, but in a way that feels kinda welcome in this context.
Pickle.
I'll certainly take it over something as flavorless as Drug Lab. Gameplay-wise, this level is nothing we haven't already seen. The streets are just corridors, with pockets of enemies halting our progress every few feet. Occasionally, you'll have to figure out the solution to a very basic traversal puzzle. Crouch jump over this, drag this box here, except the dragging mechanic is kinda broken for me. It works sometimes, others not, but here it did not, and that broke progression for me, so I had to no-clip into the vent to finish the level. Now, that's not Mr. Clean's fault, but even if the dragging mechanic was working as intended, the platforming is tedious, and overall, I just found the whole mission kinda boring. The bad guy kidnaps a schoolgirl and holds her hostage, you pop him in the head 3 times, and it's over. Why is she taking damage? At least I got to use another AUG. Mr. Clean is yet another amateur Quake mapper turned Ritual Entertainment level designer. He remained at Ritual through its acquisition by casual and mobile developer Mumbo Jumbo, and would later go on to work at Nerve Software alongside The Castle. Although after Aliens Colonial Marines, he pivoted to non-gaming 3D modeling work, and dude, I don't blame you. He also taught piano for a bit, so that's neat. Mission 10 is a bit of a change of pace. Turn of the Crank is a drug bust level. Set in Modesto, California, you turn up at a crack house with a suitcase full of cash and ring the doorbell.
Entre, Holmes, you late.
Some walking stereotypes lead you into a back room, where you flash the cash, signaling your team to move in.
Ah, this looks good. In return, I'll gladly provide you with some of my quality product.
What ensues is what I found to be the most frustratingly designed level in the game. There are seemingly endless enemies around every corner, set up in a way that means you basically can't avoid taking at least some damage from them. There's also a couple of areas where the game spawns people behind you in areas you've already cleared. From where? From where? From where? Maybe the idea was to give the impression that you're being chased, but in reality, it just feels like a way to score some extra cheap hits on the player. That is to say, I did not vibe with this mission. The undercover drug bust is an interesting enough concept for a level, but it's flubbed from the moment these dudes wiggle their bandana jaws.
What's in the briefcase?
There's a lot of potential in setting a shooter level in the familiar streets of a big, densely populated American city, and given this is the only time Condition Zero does it, I was hoping for a bit more than musty, mostly empty warehouses. What's most puzzling about Turn of the Crank is that it was designed by Richard Gray, aka Level Lord, seemingly the most experienced level designer we've heard from thus far. With roots in software engineering, he made Doom levels in his free time, which landed him a job at Monolith working on the 1997 cult classic FPS Blood. He subsequently worked on Duke Nukem 3D before joining what would become Ritual Entertainment, where he contributed to the official Quake expansion, Scourge of Armagon. That's a pretty solid track record, from which Turn of the Crank is quite a step backwards. Though in fairness, there is no telling how the level might have turned out had this version of Condition Zero been finished. That's true of all of these, but given the setup and introduction, I get the feeling there were bigger plans for this one. Still, I find it to be about as weak as the game gets, and it may just edge out Drug Lab for my least favorite level. Mission number 11 is called Alamo, and it takes place in a fictional Middle Eastern country called Bashistan. Blah blah blah, American Embassy, blah blah blah, hostages, blah blah blah, King Kebab. Oh shit, King Kebab? Oh cool, yeah, I love unavoidable damage. This is another Richard Gray level, and while it's probably the most visually boring in the game, it mercifully plays a little better than the last one. You're told to clear the terrorists out of the King Kebab restaurant, locate some hostages, and bring them up to the roof for a chopper exfil.
Such courage should be rewarded.
You fight some minor wave defense, and it ends. It's short, but not sweet. Many of the enemies feel exceedingly static, even by this game's standards. There are lots of dudes on rooftops and in windows, some of which respawn almost immediately after being killed. The level isn't quite as restrictive as Drug Lab or Turn of the Crank, but it's just another trek through empty, collapsing buildings and the occasional vent. That said, it's not that there's anything horrifically wrong with Alamo, it's more that the formula is just really wearing thin at this point. The novelty of even a passable single-player Counter-Strike level is starting to be outweighed by the issues with hit detection and the jankiness of the scripting. In short, there's only so much I can take before I stop caring. That might seem like a weird criticism of a first-person shooter, but consider that the most successful games with counterterrorism themes are just as much about their downtime and tension as they are about firefights. Something only a couple of Condition Zero's designers seem to understand. You might be able to tell that I'm starting to get a bit fatigued here, but thankfully there's only one mission left in the primary campaign, and it's the final level from the castle. Rise Hard is yet another high-stakes, find the nuke type beat. It mixes the straightforward room clearing of Thin Ice with the multi-storied traversal and larger-scale battles of Secret War. The opening sequence is loud and epic, and is one of the few times in the entire campaign where your allies seem to be noticeably fighting alongside you. I especially like how this one gets wounded, and they actually animated him limping to cover. It's a nice touch. After crossing a sky bridge, you're dropped into an office interior, and the level becomes much more solitary. Rise Hard reminds me of Perfect Dark and The Matrix, not to mention the intentionally invited comparisons to Die Hard. And those are very good things. Something about late 90s games and how they render office buildings will forever be a vibe. I will say the enemies are far denser than any of the castle's other levels. It's never quite as detrimental as it is in the game's weakest moments, but it gets to be exhausting, especially when you're faced with RPG guys or when enemies are practically spawning in your mouth. That last bit was kind of surprising, given the level of polish most of Meekham's levels usually exhibit, and I suspect it was meant to be fixed at some point. Eventually, we find our way up to the machine gun nest we faced at the beginning of the level and put it out of commission. Our next elevator ride is interrupted, leading to some Half-Life-assed shaft parkour, and we end up on the roof, dodging a chopper gunner and popping snipers and various dudes hiding around corners as we go.
Welcome! Wake up! Wake up, oppressor! You've nothing to fear. You'll soon be judged, and our people will finally be free. Ah, so there's still some fight left in you. So be it. It doesn't matter. In just a few minutes, nothing will matter. Go ahead. Pick up that knife. Try to strike me down, you fool.
True to life, he pussies out and runs away. We grab an M60 and hold left mouse for a bit.
I can still remote detonate the nuke! You can't win! Get ready to meet your maker! Oh, you think you won, don't you? I can still remote detonate the nuke! You can't win!
Congratulations, soldier. The enemy has been scouted and defeated. You have averted a certain catastrophe.
Out of the castle's 4 levels in Condition 0, this is definitely the weakest. But it's not a bad finale, all things considered. The scale is big, the stakes are high, and it takes a decent chunk of time to complete without ever feeling padded. I think stopping a nuke and sending an omnicidal terrorist to a 40-story demise is more than grand enough to cue the credits. Now, having just witnessed Condition 0 deleted scenes firsthand, it may be tempting to say Valve made the right call in cancelling it. They weren't impressed with the game, and that was that. Except there's a lot more to it. With the complete picture in mind, I don't think the quality of Ritual's work ever mattered. They were doomed from the moment they took on the project. Look, I love Valve as much as the next autistic child of the 2000s. There was a point in time that working for them was my dream career. There is something to be said for their commitment to remaining independent, and they aren't pumping out soulless games full of FOMO mechanics. But as people have started to realize in recent years, they are not to be idolized, and if you think their continual failure to manage themselves is bad, they have a track record of consistently fucking over independent studios they've worked with. Years ago, I covered a studio called Logicware and their cancelled Macintosh port of Half-Life, which was more or less completed and ready for release when Valve pulled the plug. As part of the process, I interviewed Rebecca Heinemann, a legendary and accomplished developer who, at the time, was running Logicware, and she told me that she desperately tried to find some sort of compromise with Valve, even offering to pay for the right to publish their port, but Valve simply refused. And this, along with another lost license around the same time, essentially forced the company to close their doors. As for Condition 0, 4 different studios had their hand in it, and all 4 would end up either closing, or just with a majorly negative opinion of Valve. Rogue Entertainment was a small studio from Dallas, most famous for developing American McGee's Alice. In an unfortunately very common turn of events for independent studios at the time, EA pulled the rug out from under them while they were working on Alice's PS2 port. After spending a bit of time looking for a new project, Valve approached them to make a single-player Counter-Strike game. This short-lived partnership saw work on Condition 0 commence in April of 2001 as a linear, single-player shooter not unlike what we got in deleted scenes, but after only a month of development, project lead Jim Molinets decided to go work for Sony instead. According to Bobby Pavlok, who was a level designer at Rogue at the time, their point of contact at Valve felt, in their words, betrayed. They accused the team at Rogue of knowing that Molinets was leaving, which they didn't, and yanked the project away from them, despite assurances that Molinets' most important work had already been completed, and that the team could go on without him. The official story from Gabe Newell was that they feared Rogue wasn't stable enough to complete the project. But you know what destabilizes a studio, Gabriel? Having 2 projects pulled without warning. Needless to say, Rogue didn't last long. Employees were sick of working on projects that didn't matter for money that didn't end up materializing, and the company collapsed before the end of the year. Enter Studio Number 2, Gearbox Software. You probably know who these guys are, and that they already had an established history of working with Valve prior to Condition 0. They rebooted the project, and, presumably at Valve's discretion, began designing something not unlike the finished product. A multiplayer-focused title with a single-player scenario mode with bots. Honestly, given the company's pedigree and later work, I suspect this is the version of Condition 0 that might have been alright had it been finished. But after 1 year of development, which was primarily funded from Gearbox's pockets, Valve came to them and more or less demanded that they scrap what they had and pivot back towards a linear campaign. In Randy Pitchford's words,
so I was like, this is kind of bullshit. So I walked. I told them, fuck off.
And thus, we're on to Ritual, who once again rebooted development with the original linear concept of Rogue's design. We know fewer specifics about Ritual and Valve's parting of ways, but we can surmise that it really hurt the company, given that this was Ritual's last real, full-scale project. After Condition Zero, they made a Delta Force expansion, did the cinematics for Avalanche's 25 to Life, and self-published the first and only episode of a Sin continuation that was meant to have 9 parts. The decision to abandon Sin and to sell the studio to Mumbo Jumbo both suggest that Ritual was in dire financial straits in the wake of Condition Zero's effective cancellation. Valve did all of that just to have Turtle Rock reboot development again, and make the game that Gearbox would have. Valve wasted years and burned bridges with a ton of developers for a mid-video game that they replaced 6 months later. Turtle Rock was the only studio to come out the other end of Condition Zero both alive and still willing to work with Valve, who would purchase them and rename them to Valve South in 2008, coinciding with the release of Left 4 Dead. And they hated it! They hated being owned by Valve! After the acquisition, Valve relocated a dozen of Turtle Rock's staff to Washington, and then complained that Valve South was too small to justify operating. Turtle Rock's few remaining employees felt that communication from on high was slow and unsatisfactory, and that working with teammates who'd been moved 2 states away made development for Left 4 Dead's sequel and DLC unnecessarily difficult. The arrangement was disastrous for all parties, so much so that they unanimously agreed to close Valve South, with Valve releasing rights to Turtle Rock's name and logo so they could reform the company independently the same day. Say what you want about Evolve and Back 4 Blood, but at least they were made on Turtle Rock's terms. Now, you could look at any one of these fallings out and say it's all he said, she said bullshit, but all 5? This is a pattern. And depending on how much you trust Randy, it might even get worse. In NoClip's 2018 documentary Unforeseen Consequences, Pitchford said that Valve's Eric Johnson told him years down the line that part of Valve's wishy-washiness with Condition Zero was intentional stalling. They were allegedly holding Condition Zero hostage in their messy lawsuit with Vivendi Universal, who'd absorbed their longtime publisher Sierra Online in 2002. Granted, this is Randy Pitchford we're talking about, so take this with a grain of salt, but if it's true, it indicates that Valve were purposefully gambling the livelihoods of dozens of independent developers so that they could win a lawsuit that had nothing to do with any of them. Fucked Up does not even begin to cover it. If there is a silver lining here, it's that Ritual's work did still see the light of day. Not only did deleted scenes release, Valve kept adding levels and still gives it compatibility updates to this day. I could get into the bonus levels, and maybe I will one day, but honestly, you get the gist of what's going on here, and I've had my fill for now. Condition Zero is a strange, forgotten era of Counter-Strike, and one that I suspect deterred Valve from ever attempting anything like it with the Counter-Strike IP again. And that's honestly too bad. As nightmarish as the game's development was, the tactical shooter space is in grave need of some fresh single-player ideas. And even though deleted scenes rarely impressed me, it was cool to have a new experience with a franchise I've otherwise spent thousands of hours with. I'm glad I checked it out, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. I'm obligated to remind you to do all those influencery engagement things, and also to mention this is a Patreon-supported show. If you enjoyed the video and feel like helping me continue to make more like it, you can do so by pledging as little as $1 a month. I just uploaded a video where I go back and revisit the video I did almost 5 years ago on CSGO's Xbox 360 version, and literally any contribution gets you access to that and future videos I'll be doing in a similar vein. Enough shilling though, I'll get out of your hair now. I'm hungry.